Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back once again to Forza Motorsport 2, a game which looks and feels remarkably good for its age, and is easily one of my favourite games of the Forza franchise still. And if you are familiar with the way that I review these older games, or more specifically the cars in them, I don't review cars that are available in the newer games. That might seem strange then, because why are we reviewing the Lotus Exige? Because it is available in newer games, of course in newer forms, but even this one surely is seen again. Well actually, no it's not, because this, in a similar way to the Porsche Boxster that I recently reviewed in Forza 3, is a specific year variation that is never seen again. So it's not the most important change around, but it's certainly a car that deserves that attention for even just its own car review, let alone anything else. And interestingly, there is actually a unicorn variant of this car, which has exactly the same spec, same category, same class, everything is the same. And it's also based on this same model year, and that is called the Espionage Edition. Unfortunately though, I never owned that one. I never had that unicorn in Forza 2. This one though, of course you can buy in the game anyway. It's 69,000 credits, which is actually not too bad for a British sports car. They tend to be more than that usually, but at the end of the day, of course, it's a small, lightweight Toyota engine Lotus, so it's not going to be like Esprit, Jag, Aston level, that kind of thing. So what do you actually get from this car? Well, the specs are slightly different to other Exiges, of course totally different to the newer one with a much larger engine. It's a much physically larger vehicle in general, a very good one, but a totally different machine compared to this one. This one was much more of what it originally started life as, basically a hard-top Lotus Elise that was a little bit more track-focused, but felt a lot more track-focused than it really was. Now, this particular one's engine is, as I mentioned earlier on, a Toyota motor, mid-mounted, 1.8 litre, and it puts out decent specs, 189 horsepower, 133 pound-feet of torque, and of course, in a car that only weighs 875 kilos, you don't really need a massive amount of power to have a lot of fun, especially at the time that this came out, which was 2005. And incidentally, in 2005, the small sports car market, British or otherwise, was very different to what it is now. There were far fewer of these smaller, more niched brands, and small sports car actually meant small sports car. Even something like the Exige now is a lot heavier than it used to be. This really was a bare bones approach. A proper Lotus approach, you could say. Now, the funny thing about the Exige, in any of its forms, and if I recall correctly, I think they had the Sport 240, which of course is the superior model, even in later Forza games, and even that one, I didn't see a huge amount of people using it, which was always a surprise to me, because you could tune it up to a really high category, mostly because of the ultra lightweight, so whatever amount of power you give it, it's going to be quick, more or less, but this one, it pretty much didn't get any attention at all. Now, I can't remember, of course, all of the races that I did in online lobbies, but I don't recall ever seeing this car used. And in that sense, it kind of reminds me again of that Porsche Boxster that we looked at in Forza 3, because likewise, why would you go for a Boxster if you've got more money than that and you could just go for a 911, or even a Cayman, or even a newer Boxster? Likewise with this one, why would you go for this when you could just get the 240, or an Elise that's cheaper, or an Esprit, just go full super sports car? It was a car that was unfortunately doomed by the fact that racing games just don't work like real life does. In real life, variations sell well, because different people want different things from their car, different price points, different performance, different trim levels even. That works very well in real life. It's why, of course, you have so many different options for every car on the market. In a game, though, it's simply not necessary, which is why you'll often see jokes about, for instance, Gran Turismo having so many variants of the same thing, be it RX-7s, Skylines, whatever the case may be, and Forza has done it in similar ways with other cars too, but to a lesser degree. Likewise, this car isn't entirely necessary. It's a car which is not the superior model of the Exige range to begin with, so why would people buy it in the first place? Well, to be honest, the answer to that is fairly simple, and it's not as negative as you might think. it's for Lotus enthusiasts, because those are the people who do appreciate this kind of car being featured in the game, and it's the same kind of people, not Lotus enthusiasts, but enthusiasts in general, who do actually like to see variants of cars featured in games like Forza and Gran Turismo. People who might own some semi-obscure version of the Nissan Skyline that no other game might have, but chances are Gran Turismo might have. Likewise with this one. Of course, most of the people playing Forza aren't Lotus owners, but for Lotus aficionados, it's nice to see a variant. It's nice to see some variation between models, and although for the vast majority of us, we don't really care too much about that, and for me, for instance, I certainly wouldn't miss this car if it wasn't in the game, but it is interesting that they opted to, on certain occasions, have these little variants and variations of models. The Exige is a curious one to go with because, as I said, neither of them were particularly useful in terms of racing, and unfortunately it suffers from a similar syndrome to what many small sports cars do in racing games, and that is that even with the low weight, as soon as you put any kind of power into it, regardless of a turbo or a supercharger, the category, the PI points, the PP points, whatever it may be in the particular game, it goes through the roof immediately. And the problem with that, of course, is that you are immediately going up against actual supercars in a vehicle that has maybe half, if not a third of the power in some cases. And the funny thing about that is, once again, in a strange kind of way, it ties into what I was saying about real life having completely different parameters to make a good car than what a game does. Because in a game, it's all about what will win. In real life, people who buy high-performance cars are not racing them. They're driving them on the street and enjoying them, so the parameters of what makes these cars good is simply not the same. And this one, in real life, is such a good small sports car because it can beat a lot of higher level machines for the exact same reason as why Lotus used to be great in Grand Prix and in racing in general, and that is that these big powerful cars are all well and good, but if you can't actually get a driver who can put all that power down, or the right track where you can use all of that power and speed, a smaller, lighter car is often more of an advantage. It's why Lotus did well, it's why Mini did well in rallying, numerous other cars as well. In a game, it just doesn't work like that. There's no threat of death, you have much more of an accurate feel of the size and proportions of a car, especially in chase cam rather than cockpit mode, and you can just throw larger, more powerful cars around far more easily than you can in real life. So all of the best things about a car like this can't really be experienced in a racing game, because it's a needless variant, you could strongly argue, and also one which, from a performance point of view, so quickly levels up because of how innately fast it is, that it becomes very quickly and somewhat ironically outclassed by the cars that you end up going up against, like actual supercars or even lower level race cars. Overall though, it is interesting that they had this variant. Of course, it is worthy of having its own dedicated review, which is exactly why we did this, and these days you don't see many of these older Lotus models in many racing games anymore. There was a period of time where it was in a number of different ones like Forza, Test Drive Unlimited, doubtless others too that I'm forgetting. Nowadays, not so much, and I'm sure people would actually love to see something like this come back to Forza or Gran Turismo. But overall, that's it for my thoughts on the Exige, the 2005 model in particular, and of course I'd love to hear your thoughts about it down below if you recall using it, or maybe if you go back and check it out again. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.